And we are back on the 0 Hour. Can you tell a person's political leanings just by the words they use on Twitter? Our next guest has conducted research that suggests that, in fact, you can. Matthew Purver is reader in computational linguistics in the School of Electronic Engineering and Computer Science at Queen Mary University in London. He's also co-head of the Computational Linguistics Lab and deputy head of the Cognitive Science Research Lab, and involved with, among other things, the Center for Digital Music. Matthew, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi there. Very nice to join you.
So listen, your study, which you co-authored, you looked at, I believe, nearly 1 million tweets from 10,000 distinct users. And what did you find?
Yeah, so what we did is we went and we looked for users that we could find who we could get some indication of what their political affiliation was. And so what we did is we chose people who either followed some of the main Republican Party accounts but not Democratic Party accounts, or the other way around, people who followed Democratic Party accounts but not Republican Party accounts. That way we could be reasonably confident, at least over a large data set, that we had some representative set of people where we knew to some degree of confidence their political affiliation. And then we just looked at the language that they used in their everyday tweeting. So this wasn't just when people were talking about politics or talking about particular topics. This is just their general language that they use in anything that they post on Twitter. And so we investigated some of the words that people tend to use that we thought would be associated with what some of the findings other political psychologists have found about what they think, the traits, the personality traits, I guess, that are associated with political affiliation.
And here's one of the words, if I may jump in for a second, Matthew. Here's one of the words that I think some of our listeners might expect it to be the other way around, but this, I believe, is consistent with other research, that, in fact, it's people, liberals, who are more likely to use individual words like me, while conservatives tend to go toward group-oriented words like us. Is that correct?
That's right. So we looked at the correlation with individual first-person singular pronouns. That's words like I, me, mine, myself. And it turns out those are stronger associated with the group who were Democratic Party followers versus first-person plural pronouns. That's we, us, our, ourselves, and so on. And those were stronger associated with Republicans.
You know,
you're right that it might seem surprising, but it does fit with some of the things that other psychology studies have told us, that right-wingers are more likely to draw their morals and some of their sort of sense of what's right from things like whether the group that they associate with thinks that's right, or whether they think that it's something that's shared by a group. So, and also that they possibly talk more about drawing things from a sense of authority. So we think that that's what's going on here. They're more likely to use words like we because they're expressing things, either because they think they're what a group of people rather than just themselves thinks, or because they'd like it to sound that way.
So this would be overly glib, but one's tempted to say that a liberal is someone who promotes collectivism in an individual way, and a conservative is the opposite, something to that effect. But it
might be a little bit glib to put it that way. I see where you're coming from. You've got to remember that all we're looking at is word statistics, so it is slightly hard to really tell what's going on behind this. But it does give us some indications along those kind of lines that liberals seem to want to express uniqueness or individualness, whereas conservatives seem to want to express something like group affiliation.
And or the conservatives take solace in a kind of acting tribally, but it's fascinating, it's intriguing. Also, you found differences in religiously oriented words, correct?
That's right. So those are, words like God and Psalm and so on you're more likely to see those from people who follow Republican accounts, people who we think are more likely to be right-wingers. That might not be so surprising, I guess, right? That is something that we predicted at the beginning that we'd find.
Right, and you also, I would agree with you. We're talking with Matthew Purver, who has co-authored a study on the language used by liberals and conservatives on Twitter. You also, this was interesting, liberals were more likely to discuss international news. They frequently mentioned Kenya, which was the chief international story at the time, because 60 people had been killed in violent attacks there, and Delhi as well. But here's an interesting finding that I hadn't really thought about one way or the other. It sounds like Democrats did not mention their leaders so much as they talked about their opposition, and the same was true for Republicans. Is that true?
And the other way around, yeah. So it probably isn't surprising that one group mentions a word like Obama more than the other, and one group mentions a word like Cheney more than the other. But it's the other way around to what you might initially expect. So
Yeah.
Democrats were more likely, excuse me, than the Republican group to use the word Cheney. Republicans are more likely to use the word Obama and Pelosi, I think, were two of them, than the Republican group. And that's not saying that the others didn't say the word Obama. It's just that they didn't say it any more than you would expect someone to on average.
That
So
is
it's
quite.
like people were taking to Twitter to talk about their opponents.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I mean, again, just being glib, I would say if I were a Republican, I wouldn't mention Dick Cheney either. But the fact is, what I took out of that, correctly or not, or what I was tempted to take out of that, since I try to be more judicious than that, is that there is a kind of that our political communication in this country may emphasize the negative, at least when it comes to personalities, more than the positive, and that maybe people of both political leanings bond more against figures they dislike than they do in support of figures whom they appreciate.
So I guess that's possible, but you've got to remember that one of the limitations of what we're doing here is we were just looking at language on Twitter. So whether that's actually a feature of political communication per se, or whether it's just a feature of the way these groups tend to talk on Twitter, we can't say from this data, right? This might be a particular network-specific thing that people like to rant about people they don't like, or that these groups of 10,000 people that we found did. So it's tempting to draw some conclusions. We have to be a little bit careful. This was a study that's limited to one particular network.
Would it be possible to do studies in other media and perhaps polling and cross-tabulate them, or would that be to see whether that holds true, or would that be a bit too invasive?
So we definitely like to think so. So one of the reasons we did this study to begin with is that it's data that's just out there all the time. It's naturally occurring data. You haven't had to go up to people and ask them their opinions. You haven't had to script a particular question, so they don't feel under any pressure to sort of react to your political survey in a particular way. And that has its own benefits, right? This is just investigating what people say anyway in the course of their lives. So there are obviously other electronic networks that we could go and look at as well to look at people's language. What you'd really like to do, though, is get something that's more of a cross-section of the population that doesn't have the limitations that Twitter does in terms of people's access to the internet, in terms of, you know, the bias that it has for particular age groups, or the bias that it has against particular age groups. It's harder to imagine how to do that.
Right. Right. Now, and we're talking with Dr. Matthew Purver of Queen Mary University of London. Now, you said that you were quoted as saying that open social media provides a huge amount of data for use in understanding offline behavior. How would that be? How could information like this be used to understand how people behave in the real, for lack of a better term, the real world?
Well, so what we can tell from this is that there's in some cases, surprisingly strong correlations just between the basic words that people use, not really the topical words that they use, so they're not really associated with the content in some cases. They're just the sort of the mechanics of the language, things like pronouns and things like emotional content, that seem to be genuinely different between groups of people who do something different in the offline world. They have a particular preference for a political party. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty amazing finding to begin with. So
and just to be clear,
seem clear that this is going to extend to some other things other than just politics. So we've done other studies on how language reflects things like people's mental health. Other people have done studies to find out whether language online reflects your geographical location, your gender, even your the likely level of poverty or wealth in a particular region. And it's people are starting to find there's an awful lot you can tell from the way people talk about how they actually live their lives.
Now, and just to be clear, Dr. Purver, we're really talking about language that's used not just in this case in political speech, but in all speech, right?
That's absolutely right.
All online, in this
So,
case, all Twitter speech.
yeah, so what we did here is the way we sampled the users was by looking for whether they followed particular party accounts. But then we just took essentially a random sample of their talk. We weren't looking for when they were talking about politics. We were just looking
Right.
for all of the things they've said during a particular time period. So it was over a month or so in the summer last year.
Well,
So it should be a relatively representative sample, if you.
yeah. Well, one final question, if we can, which is, yeah, one final question, if we can, which is, now this research takes advantage, as you mentioned, of the enormous database of words being created by social media. Any thoughts on your own future research or other avenues to take these findings that you've uncovered?
So we're interested in what we can find out about the different facets of people's personalities and the different elements of people's preferences that you can find from this. I'd love to take it a little further in the political sense and looking at whether we can augment the kind of polling that people do offline. I don't think we're not trying to replace polling that people do offline. There's a lot of benefits that you get from the kind of techniques that people use at the moment. But I think we can give a lot of information to augment that, which can really help understand what the general populace out there are interested in, what they like, what they don't like, what they react positively to, what they don't react positively to. But I think we can also take it a long way beyond that. And as I say, one of the things we're interested in at the moment is mental health and trying to investigate whether we can tell when people are actually suffering, when people are happy, what they're happy about, when they're not. See if we can even possibly try and find and help people at risk and track people's progress and help with treatment. So we're trying to see what we can do in those kinds of areas too.
Well, that would be a great direction for your research. I strongly suspect that the advertising agencies would like to use it in other ways, and if they haven't contacted you already,
not to say that, but I'm sure you're right.
Yes, all right. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on the program and discussing this research with us. It's fascinating. Dr. Matthew Purver, Queen Mary University in London. Thanks once again for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks.
I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and we will be right back after this. This is the Zero Hour.